Okay, so what do we have here? Today, I felt like trying to define clearly the term woke. This term has become very important politically and culturally within the West, more so after the recent election in the United States. And within our upcoming election here in Canada, this term is getting thrown around in the political discourse by mostly the Conservative Party attacking Justin Trudeau's party, and making claims like they are going to eliminate wokeness from Canadian institutions if they win the election. But what does this actually mean? I don't think the general public really understands. They may be familiar with the general vibe of things that are considered woke, but if they were asked and tried to explain how to connect these things together, I think they would struggle. So I'm going to try and provide a clear definition. And when I looked for other people's definitions, I was very disappointed. I have never seen a clear, written, concise definition like you would find in a dictionary of the word woke. I mean, I didn't look super hard, so I'm sure it exists. But one of the first things I came across when I wanted to see how other people define this word is this video from Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a very influential character on the American right at the moment. And he has his definition, which I think has some flaws in it, and I'm going to point those out. But first, let's listen to what he has to say.
Turf and win. So you don't know what woke means? Here's what it means. I'm going to define it in neutral terms that nobody can deny, okay? Being woke refers to waking up to invisible alleged societal injustices based on genetically inherited attributes: race, sex, and sexual orientation. And further, it creates a hierarchy based on these genetic attributes to say that you're either an oppressor or you're a member of an oppressed class, which creates these invisible relationships that creates a social hierarchy. And what they say is we need to turn that social hierarchy upside down, or at least even it out, by using any means necessary, not just through government, but even through the private sector, even through our schools, and even through our economy itself, including the use of quota systems based on race, gender, and sexual orientation to correct for those alleged societal injustices. That is what it means to be woke. That is what the woke movement is all about. Whether you're on the left or the right or the center, you look at what proponents of this movement have said over the last 10 to 15 years, that's exactly it. So now we've defined woke. We've done it. Jen Psaki, MSNBC, you claim it can't be done. You purposefully cut out my repeated definitions of it. I wrote an entire book about this 2 years.
Okay, so apparently Vivek wrote an entire book about this, which I haven't read, but I think his definition is not quite as detailed or accurate as it could be. And one thing that I'll point out is he, made the implication, well, he clearly stated that the identity groups are the genetic immutable traits, which isn't quite right, obviously, because intersectionality and identity politics encompasses essentially an infinite variety of different identity groups that are not necessarily just genetic immutable traits. There are far more modifiable traits that are sacred within wokeness, right? Like your religion, your language, your education, your wealth, your weight, your gender identity. All these things are not genetic. They're modifiable. Some are more objective than others, right? But there's a lot more different identity groups. The other problem with his definition is he went on for about over a minute. If we want to define it, we need to have a clear one-sentence definition that we can fit in a dictionary. And then after we have that clear, concise, small definition, we can expand on all the other things that we mean by the term woke. And that's what I'm going to attempt to do, at least. Welcome to my slideshow of WTF is woke. I feel like I am doing an assignment for school or a school project or something, but of course, in reality, I'm just so brain rotted that this is actually what I do in my spare time just for fun. But here it is. This is my concise dictionary definition of wokeness. It is a sociopolitical worldview characterized by a fixation with identity groups, victim status, moral virtue signaling, hostility towards critics, and the devout support for certain polarizing social issues. So I think that definition, it fits in one sentence. There's a variety of different factors within that definition, but I think it is a lot more encompassing than Vivek's definition, where he only focused on genetic, immutable identity traits, and he didn't mention anything about the victims. Actually, no, he did mention the hierarchy of victim status, but he didn't mention the virtue signaling, the hostility towards critics, or the devout support for certain polarizing social issues, which I think are kind of fundamental pillars of wokeness. And I don't think wokeness, in my opinion, is kind of a yes or no thing, whether is something woke or is something not woke. I think it is a bit more subjective, and it is a bit more of a spectrum situation. So you could have someone who is lightly woke, or you could have someone who is full blown, a woke warrior, and they are ticking all the boxes, or you could have someone who's only ticking one or two of the boxes, right? So what are those boxes? I have identified the 5 pillars of woke. Number 1 is identity politics. Number 2 is equity prioritized over equality. Number 3 is signaling your allyship. 4 is a hostility towards critics. And 5 is specific sacred social issues that we can specifically identify. Okay? And I think to be woke, you don't need to have all 5 of these present. But the more you have that are present, the more we can clearly say that something is woke, or someone is behaving woke. Okay, first of all, identity politics. What is identity politics? It is the use of intersectionality, right? Essentially, identifying which identity groups different people belong to. So these identity groups can be immutable or modifiable categories, right? Your immutable categories, that is your something like your age, your racial genetics, your sex, right? Those are, you can't change those. Modifiable categories are things like your wealth, your religion, your language, your gender identity. These things they are able to be changed about a person, okay? And within identity politics, of course, you are creating oppressed groups and oppressor groups. So an example in their mindset of who is oppressed might be women. Who is the oppressor? It is men. Okay, it's very simple. So there's a hierarchy of victimization. And of course, this is within a Western perspective. So within wokeness, we are viewing, let's take a religious example. So within wokeness, they would view the Christians as the oppressor and the Muslims as the oppressed, right? But of course, if we were to go to Afghanistan, it's going to be flipped. That's not going to still be true, right? So identity politics and wokeness is a very Western perspective of looking at things. Here's an example. This is what they use in Canadian schools to teach people about intersectionality and different identity groups. And something interesting on here is they have all sorts of different identity groups. They don't have sex. They replace sex with gender, but it's actually not gender. It's gender identity. So we can see here on in the center of the circle, they have power. So power essentially means that you are the oppressor. And if you're on the outside, then you are the oppressed, right? You are the marginalized, as it says here. So we can see things like if you are in the middle, you are what they call a cisgender man. And then if you are the oppressed, you are trans, or you are intersex, or you're non-binary. They lump in medical conditions with gender identities, of course. We can see other things they have on here. They have your sexuality, they have disabilities, they have your education level, they have your race, if you are what's your citizenship status, language, how rich or poor you are, if you're homeless, if you're fat or if you're skinny, if you're mental health, if you're, robust or if you're supposedly vulnerable. They have autism on here. So you can see they're kind of creating this infinite amount of different identity groups that people can be identified in and pitted against each other within. Okay, so that's identity politics. Moving on to the next pillar, equity over equality. So equity essentially means achieving outcomes that are the same. Equality means providing equal opportunity, right? The opportunity is the same. So they will achieve equity by manipulating policy and laws. It is generally anti-meritocratic. It is more about the collective of group identity over individualism. They might be using things like affirmative action or quotas for certain identity groups in certain jobs or roles. So here's a classic example of equity over equality. Here we have our friend Justin Trudeau getting elected, and he made his cabinet 50% men, 50% women. even though his base of elected MPs was not 50% men and 50% women, it was more men, but he manipulated his cabinet to be 50-50, which of course is not meritocratic, and it makes you wonder, how were these people actually being selected? Were they actually just being selected based on their sex and not necessarily the person who would be best to do the job? And, Justin Trudeau doing this, of course, is quite ironic because his government went on to be unable to define, and then they went on to erase the definition of what it is to be a man or a woman. So it's all quite, incoherent. Next pillar is signaling your allyship. So signaling your allyship can involve things like self-flagellation. What I mean by that is, in the woke mindset, if you are considering yourself within an oppressor class, you often need to proclaim that you have privilege, and you need to proclaim that you may not speak for an oppressed class. So you kind of need to censor or pretend not to have an opinion, or get wrong thoughts out of your head. Like, you need to shut yourself up. Self-flagellation is also kind of, observed in things like proclaiming your white privilege or your white guilt. Signaling your allyship is, of course, done with many different symbols, slogans, and pandering to what you think is going to be popular. So here we can have some examples, as everyone is familiar with. The classic dating app bios, where you are a baby queer, partnered baby poly, dating separately, witchy, crafty, mama, vaccinated, anti-capitalist, she/they pronouns. So, of course, this is a definition of signaling all your different intersectional identity groups and certain sacred social issues that you belong to. Here we have a bag that is covered in pins of what you might expect. We have things about, anti-police. We have things about gender. We have things about Black Lives Matter. So again, we have all these sort of intersectionality mindset of all these different identity groups and all these different sacred social issues coming together. We have signaling, where it gets quite ironic. Queers for Palestine. Of course, I don't need to point out why this is quite an insane position to hold. And then we have signaling from the highest levels of government. So the White House flying the gender flag, and of course the gender intersectionality pride progress flag is replacing the UK flag on this street. And then we have from the corporations all signaling. Okay, so the next pillar of wokeness is hostility towards critics. And this can look like several things, like cancel culture, deplatforming, outrage farming on social media, moral labels for critics, such as you are bigot, or you are phobic, or you are far right, or you are intolerant, etc., etc. And then finally, we have aggression and violence, which is the most consequential part of this hostility. So then in my images, I kind of focused a little bit more on the aggression and violence. So here is a bomb being set off in France to shut down a gender critical conference. So literally terrorism. And then, of course, most of these are going to focus on the gender issue because it is the one where they are particularly violent. So killing TERFs, millions of dead TERFs, decapitate TERFs. We have people being assaulted for exercising their free speech. On the left, a woman got punched because she was holding a sign that was critical of gender. And here we have, this is Billboard Chris getting assaulted on the streets of Vancouver for just essentially holding his billboard, which is critical of medically altering kids. No TERFs on our turf, vandalizing a building. This picture on the right, we have Megan Murphy in San Francisco getting chased down by a mob of Antifa who are very violent, and it is not clear what they would have done if they had been able to catch her, but they were assaulting people on the way to get to her. So we can assume that this violent mob would have, at the very least, assaulted her. Would they have gone as far as killing her? We can't say for certain. This is Australia, where we can see a mob of the gender people. They are kind of trying to push through the police. Ironically, the police are, actually appears most of the police are women. They're getting pushed over by the mob of gender people, many of whom are men. So the last pillar of wokeness is specific sacred social issues that we can identify. So the one that comes to mind the most, and that I'm most interested in, obviously, is the gender identity movement. This is very sacred to any woke person. And of course, connected to that is queer theory and queering normativity and undermining what is normal. And then racial issues, of course, the BLM 2020 riots. That was very much a sacred social issue towards people who are woke. Then we have sex work, sex positivity. This includes things like polyamory, fetish, porn, normalizing promiscuity and hookup culture. Fat positivity, fat activism. This is essentially the health at every size. Abortion and contraceptives is very much a pet issue of people who we would describe as woke. Destigmatizing harmful behaviors, sort of a no-shame culture. This is often connected to the opioid epidemic and giving people safe supply, which is prioritized often over rehab. And then we have the DEI policies embedded in institutions. And these are all things that I have, in my own experience, identified as sacred social issues. So you can often expect that if someone is an activist or a proponent or very devout to one of these issues, it is likely that they're also going to fall on the woke side of the culture war on all of them, okay? It's typically quite unlikely that you find someone who is extremely in favor of the gender movement, but then also critical of the BLM riots, right? You typically find that they're all connected together. So, in summary, I would say wokeness is a spectrum of belief and behavior. Not all pillars need to be present for something to be described as woke. At its core, wokeness is adversarial, it is anti-free speech, and it is dishonest about what it is. Because, of course, wokeness will claim to be compassionate when actually they're more or less tyrannical. And finally, if you forget everything in this video, you can just simply rely on knowing it when you see it. While this is obviously not as useful as being able to clearly articulate what you mean, I do think wokeness is, at the end of the day, it is one of those things where you know it when you see it. So, thank you for watching. I hope this video was entertaining. I hope you are better able to define what is woke. If you think my definition was wrong, please let me know. If you think it could be improved, please let me know. I'm sure my definition is not perfect and missing things. I mean, I did not spend hours and hours trying to research this video. This is kind of what I came up with off the top of my head, just from my own experience of being completely immersed, mostly in the gender wars, but obviously being exposed to other aspects of wokeness. So yeah. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys later.